Reena, are you here? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I think we should start and
Okay, sir.
let people join, please. Yeah, please start.
A very good afternoon. Welcome you all in our in the today's session on this lecture series of monthly lecture series on the topic of accessible housing for South Asia, needs, implementation, and impacts. I'd like to extend my warm welcome to everyone, all the guests, participants, and our honorable speaker. So, without any further delay, I'd like to request BRC Sir, Dr. Biswajit Roy Chaudhary, to say a few words. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Reena. And first of all, on behalf of South Asian Institute for Advanced Research and Development, SAIARD, I heartily welcome for today's honorable speaker, Professor Sumana Bandyopadhyay, Professor, Department of Geography, Calcutta University, for giving this valuable lecture on the very important topics related to the accessible housing sector. As SAIARD is also working in different fields, particularly in case of research, academia, capacity building, planning, policy, advocacy sectors. And we are mostly associated with the Ministry of Urban and Ministry of Water Resource. And in that respect, I think this topic is very much important and very much relevant, particularly for in case of the students, particularly in case of the researchers, those would like to work in that field. Because housing is one kind of situation which is a very typical and very relevant topic in nowadays, and case of the continuation of the population sectors, if we count the population, we can find how many people are getting accessible housing opportunities in their life. So I think in this respect, the conditions of South Asia, what is the impact or what is the economic aspect and social aspects are related with these housing conditions, and what the impacts in case of the future population. I think this lecture will definitely highlight some inputs on them. And on this basis, I also thankful to Honorable Madam for choosing this very important topic. And also on behalf of SAIARD, I thankful to all the delegates, those who have joined from the different institutions, academia from Delhi, and I saw Professor Abhay from Delhi University, our delighted students, our interns, research scholars, those who have joined from the different corners. So I heartily thank to all of you, and not last but not least my team for organizing this kind of webinar for us. So thank you, ma'am, once again, and thank you to all of you. And without wasting our time, I would request to Trina to start the next session of our lecture series. Over to you, Trina.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your words, sir. So, for today's topic, we have our distinguished speaker, Dr. Sumana Bandyopadhyay. Dr. Sumana Bandyopadhyay is currently working as a professor in Department of Geography, University of Calcutta. She is also the president of Regional Science Association of India and council member of Pacific Regional Science International. Dr. Bandyopadhyay holds a PhD from IIT Bombay. She is the supervisor for students of Doctorate of Philosophy in the areas of urban studies, urban environmental economics, development studies, gender studies since 2004. Dr. Bandyopadhyay has 6 books, 40 pages in journals, 15 occasional papers and book reviews, including international publishers like Save and Springer, to her credit till date. She holds the position of Editorial Board Member in 3 international and 2 national journals. She will be speaking on accessible housing for South Asia, needs, implementation, and impacts. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Trina. Thank you, Biswajit. First of all, thank you for inviting me for this lecture to interact with researchers in the area of urban studies. But I must tell you at the outset that when Dr. Choudhury sort of talked about the topic, I thought of discussing what we have done recently is a compilation of a book. I think he's aware of that very well, and I'm not sure how many of you have seen the book because it has just come. And basically, what we thought we would talk about is the content with regards to Indian context, because in this book has basically, I'll tell you about the book and a little bit about what the contributions have been like. It was a challenge, editing this book, bringing it down to 18-19 chapters, and talking about all the regional entities within the South Asian context, because we have papers from Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So it will be quite difficult to look at all these regional contexts, and I'm not even an expert in these regional, urban contexts in these regional contexts. So I will basically talk about what have been discussed, what has been highlighted in this book in the context of Indian issues of access to housing. And for that, we will focus. I would like to focus on the access to housing by the urban poor. For the urban poor, what kind of challenges and prospects and challenges, and basically the dynamics that have been discussed in this book. And so basically, what I will be doing is culling out the important ideas that have been generated in this book by different authors, and not really giving my own propositions and other things, because this has, experts' views and the directly empirical research conducted by several experts have been compiled here. So I'd rather like to, sort of highlight what their findings have been, and some of the expert comments that we can throw open for further discussion and debate. So I will just present my screen. Give me a minute. A little bit about a bit of background about the book, which was compiled by a team of 5 authors. We have Professor Amitav Kundu, who is a renowned person in urban studies, a renowned researcher in urban studies, and happens to be my teacher at JNU, and happens to be the person who we really rely on to give the best perspectives and debates, to bring up the best debates and the way in which the directions of debates would be highlighted, as he has done in this book, basically. Also with us was Kanika Basu, who is the Joint General Manager at HUDCO, Housing and Urban Development Corporation. So she is one of the persons who has been working in the area of housing throughout her career, and is now in a position to, sort of comment on any of the policy, because they are basically the policy makers of housing in the Indian context. We have with us Professor Tomás Dentino, who is an economist from Portugal, University of Azores, and also Professor Habibullah Magsi, who is based in Pakistan. So he was basically responsible for looking at all the papers that came from Pakistan on the urban studies issues. So we had about this, I must tell you a little bit about this book, which was basically one of the latest book on as a part of the series on contemporary issues in South Asia, which we began in 2017. We have worked on regional cooperation, one book on regional cooperation, the other one was on urban and regional sustainability, water issues, railway transformation, and the present one is accessible housing in South Asia, where we have basically, this has about 18 chapters in the book, and it basically critiques policy, evaluates policy implications, describes reality in terms of empirical studies. There are studies on rural housing, housing disparities in terms of gender, income, etc. Across 640 districts. It also questions the efficacies and provides solutions. Some of the papers are policy research, and some of it are also empirical research, comes from empirical research and talks about the situation as it exists, of course based on secondary data, because as you know, both actually. We have one paper on the Prime Minister Awas Yojana, which is done on the basis of a qualitative survey, in-depth interviews conducted in Karnataka, and we also have the chapter on housing across the disparity in housing, access to housing on the basis of census data. Census and NSSO data. So this has been an extremely challenging time for me, for us, for all of us actually, and it has been a very rewarding experience as well. So we have representations in this book from Sri Lanka. We have case studies of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, and India. I decided to talk about the Indian case studies simply because we would not have the time to discuss all the papers, because the papers on Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka are equally interesting and challenging, but it would take a lot of time to go into all 5 regions. And Nepal, of course, was very critical for us, because we were looking at the authors from Nepal have written on the post-earthquake impact on the housing and accessibility, housing, how the houses itself, those who dilapidated and affected houses in areas which are disaster-struck areas. So it would have been very interesting to discuss all that, but I would prefer to focus only on India because of time. We have senior and renowned academicians, faculty members, policy experts, planning professionals, and young researchers. So it was a very, very good mix of authors, and the USP, as we felt when we were requesting people to write about their expertise on housing policy, especially policy analysis aspect. I would like to really focus on the papers we have from, for example, from Professor Hans Schrenk, who is an international expert in the arena of policy analysis. So that was an USP for us, because people writing from their own countries have a perspective, but people from other international institutions have a different perspective about the policies, and they view it differently. So it was an additional benefit for us to look at, or have also a look at those perspectives. Basically, to begin with our discussion today, that the whole idea of accessibility in terms of housing has in its backdrop the concept of human security, and which drove us to do compilation on this particular theme is the growing number of homeless people in the developing countries, and which are basically facing absolute housing shortages. We are also looking at displaced and shelterless people across the countries which are affected by climatic hazards. For example, I have myself worked extensively on eroded, coastal erosion in the Chagor Islands in the Sundarbani region, where we found that village after village are being washed away, and how do we solve the problem of housing in those cases? They are almost annually, displaced annually, or even several times in any given year. So that kind of complex situations are are something we are facing right now. But of course, we have not been able to cover all these aspects in this in this book itself. So we hope to continue with this theme and work on much more titles, actually going for maybe focusing on displacement, focusing on climate related disaster caused, disaster driven and project driven. Both are very much evident before us. Now, also that Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals have really focused on access for all. And there is this SDG 11, which says by 2030, we must ensure access for all. And how real is that? How real does that look? As of now, we are sitting at in 2022, and 2030 is not very far away, but where are we actually? These are questions, and also the fact that, there was, at one point of time, there was success with public housing, and then the shift has been to market determined position in that sector. And also there is a repeated reminder by many researchers that housing has been at the epicenter of the global crisis in 2008. So basically we have, of course, lost out on all the information about the pandemic impact on the housing sector, because our book was completed before the pandemic set in. So I would like to talk about the slum story, because basically we have in this book the title, as you can see, Accessible Housing for South Asia, and access is a problem of the poor primarily in the developing countries. Most of all the countries which have been under consideration in this book, which is all the entire South Asian region. And the access problem needs to be highlighted, and the access problem needs to be discussed in a much more clearer perspective. And also it needs to come out, we need to come out, not only the other countries, they're doing their own policy research, but for India we have several multiple goals, actually multiple objectives, and it is very difficult to say that we can in one presentation we can talk about all that. So let me talk about maybe 2 or 3 papers which have highlighted, 2 or 3 authors who have highlighted mostly on this element of access in terms of in the Indian scenario, and what it has discussed and how the debates can open up, and also recommendations have been very sort of cross-sectional kind of recommendations have been there. There are problems, and how do we solve those problems is one of the main questions that I wanted to raise here. So we have this, we know for a long time the target 11 of MDG, Millennium Development Goal 7, was to create cities without slums. So it seems for a long time we've been hearing about this target of creating cities without slums. Now, it is a conflicting issue, of course, because we have reality, a thriving reality of the continuous migration from rural to urban in search of employment, livelihood options, in search of better education, better health facilities, and all kinds of things towards the cities. And we do not have the infrastructure to accommodate the continuous flow of people into the cities. And this is something that creates, or rather sort of continues the housing shortage. It stays on. It is something that has never been solved completely. And we also, the way it looks right now, it is not a very easy thing to do. I'm going to talk about what Professor Kundu's paper has focused here, and what he has done is he has launched into an incisive debate on the way slums are defined and how these definitions affect the data on slums. And of course, not only the data on slums, From data comes the analysis of the data, and from that analysis comes is also related to the policy perspectives. So how is it that we are going to solve the problems of housing, access to housing, if we already have such very, very different definitions and very, very different kinds of nature of data, which are basically kind of acting as hindrances to create very significant policy resolutions to be made. Now we are aware, Professor Kundu's paper, kind of highlights that. It basically highlights the two censuses. We do not have the 21 census before us. So we have the 2001 and 2011 census, where there was a change, of course. 2001 census for the first time started talking about the slums and tried to include both notified and recognized. So recognized are those slums which are not notified but have been recognized, and added a third category as well. And but then all of it is defined by physical infrastructure. And his pervasive argument of Professor Kundu's chapter debate is the fact that tenure security has not been considered, which was most important. It has been one of the, if you look at the UN definition talks about the tenure security right at the beginning. And if you talk about the UN Habitat definition, it talks about 5 factors, each reflecting an aspect of vulnerability suffered by the slum dwellers. And these happen to be: number 1, insecure residential status; number 2, inadequate access to safe water; number 3, inadequate access to sanitation and other infrastructure; and number 4, the poor structural quality of housing; and number 5, overcrowding. So basically, while the UN idea, the first point was insecure residential status. Basically, the security of tenure has been there in Target 11 right in the beginning. Security of tenure along with improvement in sanitation facilities. These were always there. But for us, for the Indian situation, that has been the constraint. That is what he points out, and he is really extremely correct in putting forward this debate as to how this can be brought in, and why the fact that this is not not a part of the way in which we define slums, that continues to remain a problem. So it was the 2001 census really defines on the basis of physical infrastructure. It does not talk about tenure security, neither does 2011 census talk about tenure security. The only difference is that 2001 census talks about all those towns and cities, gives data on all those towns which are above 20,000 in population. But 2011 census includes all towns irrespective of population, even includes statutory towns, in fact. So, and also adds data on amenities and location of the amenities. NSSO, on the other hand, has been talking about collecting slum data for a long time, much before census. It started from 76, 77 with 2 categories, which talks about declared and undeclared slums, and goes on to use notified and non-notified in its next one, that is, I think, 1983. States had no single criteria for identification. This was a problem, and therefore the data here also remained largely subjective, and substantial number of slums remain excluded from enumeration simply because there was no single criteria for identification. Also, it was not a quantitative criteria. Now, so one of the other dimensions of the problem is that the inadequate number of slums have been surveyed, because since we do not have this criteria for identification, there are a lot of slums which are neither declared and undeclared, or nor recognized, notified. So there are a lot of slums which are excluded from enumeration. So this may constitute a substantial proportion of the population of any urban place, and therefore we are faced with a situation where we do not have the we do not have we do not have a clear picture of the situation in its entirety. That is one major a major set of problems that we are facing in providing when we are trying to provide any kind of policy implication or policy execution in terms of accessible housing. Now, urban development is a state subject. That is also because the previous point here, which I made, rather Professor Kundu highlights on this, that states have no single criteria for identification of slums, and therefore the entire fact that not the entire number of not the entire real number of slums come into the picture. It is because of the urban development fact that urban development is a state subject, and the state sets guidelines which are not universal. So this makes validation and updation impossible. If you want to sit down today and validate the data for the entire country, it will be impossible, because if you cannot put all the data together in a universal plane, because the state has its own set of guidelines which have been varying. Now, most importantly, the matter of tenure and land rights have never been incorporated in India. There is a lot of debate on whether on the fact that there are political reasons behind agreement on developing slum land, and that may be the key driver here. So there are a lot of unresolved issues that continue to remain, as the beneficiary data will never be real as long as we have we have a universal kind of definition, and we have universal ideas about across the states. We have universal criteria, measurement criteria, and therefore slum-like conditions will continue to prevail, as a substantial number of slum dwellers will remain outside the definitional context. That is basically his understanding and what he has pointed out. Now, connected to this is the whole evolution of the affordable, accessible housing factor that Hans Schenk looks at, and what he does is basically look at the three. He has basically put out an idea of how the evolution has taken place, how the government has tried to provide accessible housing, and how the policies and features of the policies have changed in terms of the philosophy behind provisioning of accessible housing. So he basically talks about three phases, and in the first phase he talks in detail about the first phase, which is a phase where he clubs all 3 5-year plans basically, and says that it was this phase, of course, immediately after independence, was a phase of optimism, basically looking at the whole idea of provision of infrastructure as one of the key challenges of the government. And of course, there has been a lot of policies and a lot of new ideas that came in this phase of optimism. And he has in details talked about what has been going on, what was launched in terms of accessible housing by clubbing these 3 5-year plans, because basically there was not much in the first 5-year plan, but second and third 5-year plan had a lot to do with this entire period, had a lot to do with provision of something called industrial housing for the industrial workers. And what comes out of it is what comes out of that debate and what happens to this entire policy framework in terms of how the challenges have changed, in the sense that in spite of this phase of optimism, we find at a particular stage, 1950s and end of 1960s basically, when there was a kind of disappointment with the state institutions, and there was a shift towards individual contribution to improvement of housing. So this debate looks at the 3 phases, and which is very important for us to understand, primarily because these 3 phases are of 3 different dynamics. The first was a lot of first phase takes up a lot of protection, lot of subsidization in terms of provisioning of accessible housing, provisioning of all kind of infrastructure, in fact, especially for industrial housing. And then comes the phase of disappointment with the state institutions, where we find that what we set out to do have failed in several at several levels, and then we start looking at what are the dynamics that have led to the failure, and so that we can make the corrections in the forthcoming phases. And then comes the 1991 new economic policy phase, where everything changes. The whole scenario changes. The whole scenario of protectionism and the whole scenario of subsidies, etc. Everything changes. So there is a need to look at this entire shift from welfare objectives to a kind of competitive economy, market economy objectives, which have happened if you look at the pre and post 91 policy implications. Now, 1991 onwards, Handshake's paper very clearly identifies that the middle class and elites have been shaping the housing sector, which is in fact a very clear understanding of the entire process of policy formulation, which is facilitated by the private sector and has been at the cost of urban poor. The whole idea of subsidized housing in the peripheral locations, which was basically what the first phase of the industrial housing, provision of industrial housing was looking at, peripheral locations, shifting, because if you had to subsidize, you had to move to areas which were now vacant, first of all, and had to move to areas where the rent was low. So subsidizing has its merits, of course, but the fact that this housing was provided away from their workplace made it difficult, because the working class already works on low wages, so they have to depend on commuting. So it was price, time, cost, distance, all of it. All three were going against their. It was not creating the benefits it was supposed to. Subsidized housing was there, the housing was provided, but it was so far away from their workplace that this was a challenge. Now, essentially, this entire population, mostly he talks mostly about Bombay, because it was one place where the housing challenges have been very, very severe and very, very dynamic. The entire access issues have been very dynamic. The problems have been much more because it was highly industrialized. In comparison to Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata or Chennai, it was much more industrialized. Bombay was much more industrialized because of the textile industries, and the factory or the working class neighborhoods were very clearly identified. Their challenges, their problems were very clearly there. The entire idea of accessible housing, subsidized housing for the industrial workers, it brought about the very challenging statements could emerge from the Bombay case study, from the Bombay situation. Now, several times we have seen, not only in the first phase, that is the first 3 5-year plans, but also at different other times where there have been attempts to remove the slums or remove the slums and try to shift the slum population into proper housing, and which were housing complexes or chawls or other kinds of structures where these would not be temporary structures but would be permanent structures. But it has always fallen on its face, because these areas simply were not locationally advantageous to the working class, and therefore the population, as far back as the industrial housing of the first 3 5-year plan phase, the first initial phase, right up to say 1990s, etc., when there was attempts by the housing sector to provide better improved housing for the slum population. In every phase, in each phase in history, we have seen that the population moves back into the cities to locate themselves in dilapidated shelters, which is a journey back to the slums. And this has and then what is added to this population is the new set of rural migrants, rural to urban migrants. So that the problem remains and is magnified, and this simply falls flat and defeats the entire purpose of and also leads to a lot of spatial segregation, because when for the second time when they leave the housing and come back to their workplace, locating themselves near the workplace, they create or they live in dilapidated shelters. They are spatially segregated more than ever before. Now we have had Schenk's paper talks many a times about Ashish Bose's ideas about this kind of provision of accessible housing at distant locations. Ashish Bose has been quite critical about this, and he very much talks about the futility of this provisioning for accessible housing at a distant location. So he has argued for a long time on the fact that this provision does not help the population, but it leads to more and more spatial segregation. Like I said, there were multiple recommendations which are at crossroads, which has always been a difficult situation for the Indian case. There has been experiments with cross-subsidization of land, which was practiced in Madras initially. There was rent control and checking of speculation, which was recommended for the urban housing. For a long time, the checking of speculation has never been possible in that, because it is something which is too powerful to be controlled. If you give me a minute, and there's a window next to me, and it's raining. I'm sorry. So we have rent control and checking of speculation is one of the recommendations. But as you can see, checking of speculation is quite a challenge. And also that the fact that many experts like Professor Ashish Bose considered land ceiling to be a futile exercise, because land ceiling would only, it says that land ceiling may affect prices, and would also lower the prices, but it would never be accessible to the poor. Even the lower prices would not be accessible to the urban poor. And he also said that, he kept saying that a new rich class would emerge and would certainly take over what was available after the land ceiling implementation. There were also radical recommendations like absolute government control for all public vacant land without ambiguity. This was thought to be something which would be very, very effective, because if there is no ambiguity, and if government controls all the public vacant land, there would be it was not implemented in Mumbai. Just like I said, that the different situations in different cities have been a motivating factor in this case. And of course, again, for the case of Mumbai, political will was identified as the prime mover, the prime determinant of why it is not happening or why it is happening, whatever the case may be. This paper, he talks about, since he's taking a look at, because the book was basically trying to look at South Asian examples, he takes up the Vietnam example to talk about when Vietnam was independent, post-war independence. This was 1960s. Of the Kuthapte or the KTT model, which covered around 30% of the urban population. They have these collective area neighborhoods with ample open spaces and all necessities provided in one place, which was very, very attractive at that point of time for the workers, because they usually before the independence, before the war, they were mostly coming from very poor neighborhoods, living in slums, living in horrific conditions, and therefore this collective area concept, neighborhood concept, was very attractive for them because they had all the necessities in one place. They also had collective kitchens, collective dining areas. They had markets and everything required, that is primary health centers and schools and everything required were in their neighborhoods. So these were very well planned neighborhoods, and it covered almost 30% of the urban population, that is industrial workers and laborers. Now, we find that post 1975, up to when the merging of North-South Vietnam took place and the market economy started operating, this people were fed up with the collective neighborhood concept, the common neighborhood concept, and they wanted better. They wanted a better sort of better standard of living was something that people were expecting now. So basically, the example of Vietnam has been given in perspective of how the state could successfully provide housing for the poor by planning neighborhoods at that point of time. It comes back again in his paper, in his debate much later. It comes back as the creation of, in perspective of the creation of rural and urban villages. But here it was something that it is a very interesting idea, but it would not be the kind of solution for the Indian scenario, for example. Now, the entire debate, if you look at it, if you think about it, and if you think about how and why the debates emerge or evolve or change or transform, you would have to focus on the fact that how do you view the urban poor? Now, they are very, very vital to the urban economy on the one hand, but on the other hand, you see the urban poor. There are the entire episodes of planning, urban planning, how we plan for the city. We are looking at the urban poor as basically an unwanted group of people, an unwanted community, and we have seen several ways in which this has come out in the open, even from the people who are in charge of the entire city or the entire planning perspective of the city, which should have been inclusive, and we keep talking about inclusive development and inclusive growth, but we have a clear reference to even the Chief Minister of Delhi, Sheila Dixit, talking about slum dwellers as being the cause of crime in the city. And one of the things that Schenk talks about in his paper is the fact that this Bhagidari system came up in Delhi, where the planners called out, the governance basically calls out to the citizens to clean up the cities through their RWAs, which is the Residents Welfare Associations. They were empowered to take action in putting in place the infrastructures and amenities of the city. Now, it's very interesting that the Bhagidari system has been called by not only Professor Hans Schenk, but many other researchers at the point of time. It was thought of as a coup disguised as a partnership, and the partnership was between the government and the resident welfare associations. And it says that a lot of references are there, which talks about this proposition to be empowering the proprieted urban middle class, which constitutes about 25% of the population. So, are we looking at it as a vote bank or no? So that was the question. The other part which I wanted to highlight is the entire conflict between the smart city project and the smart city project and the slum development project. Now here we have one very interesting chapter by Professor Darshini Mahadevia, who discusses this dilemma around taking the example of Ahmedabad, because she lives and works in Ahmedabad. She's senior faculty in Ahmedabad University. So the smart city project often coincides with cleaning up the city. We talk about the smart city, which is going to be digitally advanced and enhanced, but also needs to be a very clean city, and a very smart is equivalent to clean. So cleaning up the city really means making it slum free at another point. And slum free city has also been a program, an ongoing program. But then she questions, although she is based in Ahmedabad, she talks about Ahmedabad in the case study. I would like to put it across as a general question for the Indian cities as a whole, as Indian cities per se, without talking about regions or particular cities. The smart city project, I have seen the smart city project in Jaipur. I live in Calcutta, so there is Newtown here, and there are many other cities, smart cities, which we encounter. We encounter people who are involved with the smart city project. We encounter academicians who are writing about it, researching the pros and cons of the smart city projects across India. So we can clearly say what Mahadevia talks about is the lack of data and lack of land government systems face the project. Something as important as the smart city project, it comes up. These two issues come up as hindrances, or they come up as factors which are in effect going to sort of affect these provisioning systems, or the systems of sort of balancing out whatever is needed and not needed in smart city projects. So I would rather say, though she talks about Ahmedabad, I would rather say it's a problem of the entire country, which how many ever smart city projects are ongoing right now in the country. So the smart city as such in Ahmedabad covers only around 2 square kilometers. Whereas at the same time, the in-situ slum redevelopment component is also being implemented. I am raising this question because Professor Mahadevia has raised this question by way of raising a debate, raising a point which needs to be debated. So how does these two work together? I mean, how does it help that smart city project being realized? And is it real? Does it fall flat? These are the questions we can ask. The reason why she has titled the chapter "Emperor Has No Clothes," and what her conclusions are. Not only hers, one can say that this is a conclusion of many people, that the Smart City Mission and the Housing for All are both emerging as empty slogans. I would not call it completely an empty slogan, but there is an attempt. There is an attempt to work towards it, but definitely it is going to face a lot more barriers than imagined before. So this debate is also worth considering for many other cities, all the smart city projects, in fact. And the last one I would be talking about is an appraisal made by Sangeeta Manav, who works in the HSMI, which is responsible for program implementation in a lot of ways. Also connected to the HUDCO. HSMI is, of course, now an independent organization. And this chapter uncovers the lessons learned from 61 towns in 9 districts of Karnataka. Now, PMAY Awas Yojana was launched in 2015, and this study was taking place somewhere around 2001, I think, 2001, 2. And so there has been a sufficient amount of time lapse where the program has been implemented. And what are we looking at in terms of implementation? What has happened? Now, there are instances where the security that was sort of envisaged in terms of providing this housing to the people has not really come out as expected, because of the fact that people were unable to mobilize the basic resources. often the very basic resources, of course. Some people could not even provide 1 or 2 lakhs. And here she talks about several examples, especially after the pandemic losses, during the pandemic losses, when people lost their jobs, lost their incomes, and lost their savings as well. It was very difficult to mobilize even 2 to 4 lakhs, subject to local differences. This would be something around 50,000 to 4 lakhs would be the range of mobilization that we're talking about. That would have to be of the support price, not the support price. Sorry, the contribution of the person who is being provided with the housing. So this is basically one of this study was basically, it was a qualitative study interviewing people for whom the PMAY has been implemented, actually coming face to face with reality, what exactly has been achieved and what not achieved. Of course, yes, a lot of achievement has been there. One cannot deny that, but essentially the barriers have been there. Now we need to see whether there is a success story. We are all going to say that yes, the success story is a good part of it, but we have to really focus on the places on the areas where the problems are happening, where the barriers are emerging. So we need to solve them. And that is the reason why, I don't mean to sound negative about all the policies, but we need to really look at, refocus and relook. A relook is always a good thing to do, because once you implement a policy, you need to go down on the ground to find out what has happened, and that is where I actually congratulate such efforts put forward by institutions like HSMI, that HUTCO, where they implement programs and also try to go back and see how the implementation has worked. This is really commendable, and that is where we need to focus to find out what has gone, if there are gaps in the program implementation, where have we gone wrong, what else needs to be done to strengthen these programs and schemes that come up from time to time. So this book, in fact, is like, I come to the end of my discussion. I thought I could bring up some of the issues that could be highlighted for researchers to be involved in. And the discussion on other countries would definitely have given a wider perspective, because we have very interesting takeaways from these papers on Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. And I also request all of you to contribute in this area of research, to enrich this area of research, and do send me comments, suggestions, and critiques when you do come across the book and you are able to read it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for these wonderful and valuable lectures on the topic which we have chosen, accessible housing sector. And definitely, I think that it will definitely help you get some inputs to the audience and all the participants, those who have joined from the different corners. So now the podium is only for the discussion. So I will request if any participants from this podium would like to ask any question to Madam Professor Bandyopadhyay, please ask. Is there any question to him?
I think the entire what I did discuss is there in the book, so it is not my my personal observations or any empirical study that I have done. So I thought, when you do an empirical study, you focus on one city. So so I thought I chose this manner of presentation by picking up the points that have been raised by the researchers, and very eminent researchers like Hang Schenk and Professor Amitabh Kundu and Professor Darshini Mahadevia, Professor Vinita Hariharan. Their perspectives are very different, and their perspectives are also like, they work like critiques. So critiques always help us to evaluate further. So I think that is what I have done. So there may not be many questions as such, because people have to really, just come up with more more studies on this. That is my
Yeah,
earnest request to all of you.
definitely, ma'am, definitely, and we have. You will be happy to know that on behalf of SAIARD, we have developed e-library, and where
Yes, I got the link of that, and I have also
so,
sent it to my students. It's very interesting work that you're doing. I'm really
thank you.
happy about this compilation that you have made. You have listed all the sources, e-resources,
Yeah.
and you have made it accessible through your forum, through
Yes,
your
even there are
website.
lots of government websites are there where their
Yeah,
publications can
yeah,
also be visited by the participants, those who would
yeah.
like to join for the research purpose. Even I will also request to share the link of your book as that we can also incorporate it in the e-library.
Okay, definitely, definitely,
And also I will
definitely.
request to the professors and research scholars, those who have joined here. Even I saw some of my juniors and my close friends, Vinay, Uhin, Dr. Rameshwar, Pompey as well. So, Vinay, would you have any question to ma'am? Vinay, am I audible?
Bina is also doing very interesting work on public
Yes, yes,
space.
yes.
Yeah.
He's a
So,
very good scholar as well.
yeah, his
Yes,
work is also very
you are
interesting
audible.
on public space. So let us see what comes out of his research. Again, like I said, the empirical research needs to focus on one city. So
Yeah.
beyond that, we don't have much to talk about. But even that, even each city, because in urban studies, what I find very challenging and very interesting also, and also very difficult to teach or rather talk about, give lectures, because the whole idea is that when you talk about an urban issue, it is very, very specific to that particular city. Because the way public space, for example, Binoy's work, the way public space has evolved in Kolkata would not be the way it has evolved in Mumbai. So
Hmm.
every city is a separate case study.
Separate
That
case
makes
study and
it
separate characteristics as well.
yeah, absolutely. And you don't even have universal, some kind of, you can't do generalizations in most cases. You can't have universal policy recommendations because their histories are very different.
Even ma'am, the planning, in case of planning sectors, we can feel that as I was also in urban geography and specialization during my MSc syllabus, and recently I am also working with the Ministry of Urban, and they are also focusing some discussions regarding the planning cases. Most of the cases, the planners are focusing the same planning methods in the same different cities, but it should
That
be
doesn't work. Yes,
it
that
should
doesn't
does not work because the ecosystem of every city is completely different,
work.
and on that basis we have to think in that way. And I thought that Vinay and others research scholars, those who would like to work in future in case of urban sectors, it will be a very good opportunity, particularly in eastern and northeastern India. And you will be happy to know that on behalf of SAIARD, as you know that we have developed another wings under SAIARD, that is the IIGST, particularly for GIS remote sensing platform. And on this 15th August, I mean the 75 Azadi Gamrut Mahotsav sector, we are going to launch two another centers under SAIARD, that is the Eastern Center for Urban Development, along with the Center for River Affairs. Those who would like to work in river sector
That's
as well as,
very
and
interesting. Very interesting. Very happy to know that.
and thank you, ma'am. And there I need your support as well as your scholars, those who would like to work in urban sector as well. And they are already and university is associated for certifying our courses. Along with that, we are mostly focusing for capacity building in case of ULB's sector as well as research and projects and collaboration policy advocacy sector, particularly not
Yes,
in
yes.
India, but
Exactly. That's
also
very
in the.
important to do. That's a very important work. Very good
Yes.
work that you're doing. Congratulations.
Thank you, ma'am. And so I will discuss it about in details in later.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
definitely, I will suggest that to the students, those who have joined, there are ample opportunities to work in urban sectors as well as water and river sectors as well. So if you would like to associate, if you would like to collaborate to work, then you can definitely communicate with us. And there are several resource persons, those who have joined from the different academic and research and government institutions as well. So definitely it will be helpful to join collaborative research group. So yeah, Professor Rameshwar ji, thank you for joining, sir. Would you like to ask anything?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
very thankful to Madam. Nice presentation, very wonderful. Also thank to Biswajit Rai sir, very nice your program. So international level, congratulations to all of you. Sudeep Day also. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
Thank you so
Biswajit
much,
ji.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, anybody, Nancy, I saw some people are there. Nancy, Pompey. Vinay. So, I don't think they have any queries. So, ma'am, I will request.
No,
Yes,
I actually don't have any query.
No, he has lots of queries, but he has all the queries in the department.
yes.
No. Actually, this topic I have not heard this topic earlier, and I found it very interesting because in your book you were discussing about this that there are so many issues, particularly in the housing sector, and that was untouched by the urban geographers, particularly from the Eastern Indian side. So I found it's very interesting, and I have to go through to raise so many arguments in this particular.
One thing I just wanted to share that it will be difficult for us to, as editors of the book, it will be difficult for us to share the link because they have their the contracts and other things. So because Springer, it's a Springer volume, so they also want that it is it's well marketed and well distributed.
Yes.
So I will definitely send you the chapters if you request me for certain chapters, but it will be difficult to put the book link into the.
No issue, ma'am. You can also share the chapter as well as you can share the book link also. Because if anybody wants to purchase, then they can go.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that because they have. As you understand, the publisher.
No, I understand.
The publisher has certain restrictions upon us as well.
Definitely.
I will send you the link.
As that we can incorporate there, and if anybody wants to purchase, they can also.
Yeah, definitely.
And
if you request for any particular chapter, any researcher is asking
yes.
for a chapter, definitely for research work, I will personally provide that definitely. But the book link will be difficult to share. But I would really like people to read it simply because of the fact that it's not anything else, because the Indian case studies may be available in other volumes. For example, Professor Kundu's paper. If you happen to hear him in a conference, maybe you would listen to all his debates and other things. But sometimes it helps to have the entire debate in front of you, not as a lecture but as a reading text. Because often when we listen to lectures, we are not sort of making a list of what all is included in the debates. But if you have it in print, you can refer back to it time and again as and when you need it. There's a text message I missed.
Yeah, Ashmita Mukherjee. Ashmita, you may come in front and you may ask, please. It will be better. You also introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. I was having some network issues. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this session. It was very enlightening to know about accessibility of the cities. It is a huge problem in the southeastern region. So, can you say any distinguished characteristics of the cities?
First of all, just let me clarify that we are not talking about Southeast Asia. We are talking about South Asia. Southeast Asia has more examples like the Eastern Tigers will also be included often, Eastern Tiger economies. But in the case of South Asia, what is specifically, there are no standardizations, as I said, as I was just discussing. This is the point we were raising here, that it is very difficult to have standardization, standard characteristics, discuss standard characteristics, because every city has its own history. For example, Kolkata has a colonial history with heritage and colonial policies and everything put into place. Chennai has evolved differently. Delhi has evolved differently as a capital city. NCR is completely different because Delhi is driven by master plans. Kolkata has development plans. So many differences are there. So it is very difficult to say that, standard characteristics. But yes, if you look at the South Asian countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, all these countries have, the cities have two or three very important common characteristics. One is the fact that these cities are often, these countries have cities which are often overloaded in the sense of population and in migration from rural to urban. Simply because of another characteristics which is also common across these places, which is poverty, unemployment. So these are factors which are basically driving the issues, the factors which drive the issues. And also there is a governance issue which comes into being, because it is always, ultimately, whatever we do as citizens, whatever we do as individual planners, etc., it is governance that matters in terms of large sectors of the economy. So urban sector is one such sector. It's a large sector of the economy. It's in fact the dominant sector of the economy, because in a country, it is the urban GDP that is more visible than the rural GDP. And the diversity of economies, diversity of functions, etc., everything is more critical in urban areas. Everything is more prominent in urban areas. So urban areas are a challenging area as it is. And apart from that, we have in South Asia the problem of poverty, the problem of unemployment, the problem of overcrowding, the problem of a history of primacy. Because in India, for example, the history of primacy itself has its own list of problems with it. It comes with a list of problems. Because primacy means that you are not distributing, the population is not well distributed. It is in one center. It is centered on the primate city. So that itself so historically we have issues which are common. But apart from that, one cannot say, a common policy will work or a common framework will work. No, I don't think so. The common facilities, maybe a policy of how do you provide public housing, what kind of scheme on programs and policies that you can undertake. Certain philosophies may be common, but not more than that.
Yeah,
Ashmita, have I answered you?
Ashmita,
Yes,
please
ma'am,
introduce
absolutely.
yourself.
Thank
You are from which institution? Please introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. I am from Amity University. I'm a undergrad and just got graduated in the third year. We are working as research interns in IIGST, and our work is currently based on ArcGIS software. We are learning how to digitalize data and everything.
Okay. Thank you.
That's good.
Now I see Miss Purva, Dr.
Thank you,
Purva
sir.
Sharma ma'am has joined. Purva ma'am, namaskar, and ma'am Purva ma'am is was also working in NIU, National Institute of Urban Affairs. After that, she has joined in UN Habitat, and fortunately now she has associated with our Eastern Center for Urban Development as the center in charge. So she is a very good urban planner as well as urban specialist. So, ma'am, would you like to have any points to our Professor Bandyopadhyay?
Thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can.
So, yeah. So, ma'am, these days urban inequalities, including housing, is a burning issue among the planners. I just have one question: how much data is important when we are quantifying the urban inequalities through housing? Because the latest report by Sustainable Development Goals of UNREC, it said that India is lagging behind in SDG 11, and housing is the first target, which is accessible to safe and sustainable housing. So, ma'am, my question is that how much data is required, or what kind of proxy indicators are required in order to measure what is the level or spatial distribution of inequality in urban areas?
See, basically, if you look at the list of variables, there are multiple variables, a huge number of variables that you will be talking about. But essentially, what we need to understand here is that data is not in one platform. That is the major challenge for us. For India, because we had, if you have been in NIUA, so you know exactly. We had these urban observatory programs that I attended several times at NIUA, and all of these, every time we were doing the observatory workshops, we found that there is a lack of, lack of data in one single platform. Because everybody, if you look at the empirical, because if you have census data, that's fine. Census data, Professor Kundu talks about the limitations and problems. NSSO data, everybody is aware of the NSSO data. It is more subjective than objective, and it does not cover 100%. And in urban areas, it is very difficult to say, with a sample. We are always researching with samples. Now, if you're going to take 1,000, 500, 1,500, 2,000, it does not reflect anything in terms of urban situations, urban crisis. These are the things, not sample, but these issues have been highlighted very well by Professor Kundu, Professor Schenk, and everybody. Now, what I'm really trying to put across is the fact that the entire efficacy of data in a single platform, in a single, in a universal kind of, data collection methodology, that has not been there. So it will always continue to be a problem as long as we don't have that. Because if you look at other countries, if you look at European cities, if you look at American cities, they have data out there for you, and the data is there on interactive platforms, web platforms, and people are not fudging the data. People are actually, using it well. The government uses the data. There may be, data generated by governments, institutions, public institutions, and the data is, sort of vetoed, right? Now, for us, that is the most important problem, that we do not have data in the universal, in a common platform. Now, if I'm going to work on Kolkata, I will have seven indicators to work on. Someone sitting in Delhi will have another 10 indicators. Someone sitting in Chennai. So, if we put our data across, it will never have a kind of similar way of interpreting the data. There is no means of interpreting the data similarly. So we all depend upon secondary data from census and NSSO, where again there are definitional problems where which are evident, and it is very wrong to portray this in a public platform. But I have seen census data being collected in very, very unscientific ways. That is not to say that the Census of India does not design its programs well. It does. But when it comes down to the individuals who are collecting the data, sometimes when you see them sitting somewhere and filling up the forms, that does affect you every time you walk across them. And like, for example, this time, there was no enumeration in my house last time. So no one came to ask questions. I am concerned because I am involved in research. I teach. But there are a lot of people who won't even bat an eyelid. They won't bother that the census has not come to my house.
Right. So I agree with you 100% on this, ma'am. And I think more research is required now to bring the data in common platform. Although we have many statistical methods to do that, but now they should be very well upscaled so that our officials also become aware of this. Thank you so much, ma'am. Yeah, that was my question. Yeah. Thanks, Biswajit ji.
Thank you, ma'am. So I would request to, if any resource person would like to have any query, they may ask. Otherwise, we will go for the final end of the session. Pritam, if you have any queries.
No, sir. I have no queries.
Okay.
I contributed at a chapter in this book, and I have read.
Yes, Pritam's chapter is there in the book, right?
That's good. That's really great. And Pritam,
the one I was talking about, 640, our topic, our work on 640 districts of India, that is Pritam's work I'm talking about.
Great. No, Pritam is doing very wonderful job, and I really appreciate him. And ma'am, let me just share this logo of our upcoming platform. That is the
Yeah, absolutely.
So
This is your
the
logo, right?
upcoming platform of Eastern Center for Urban Development, where we can
That's very good.
work in academia, research, capacity building, policy advocacy, collaborative project research, each and everything. So hope we will all get your support in future for this particular center. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you to all the audience, and thank you my team and all the resource faculties from the different colleges, universities, those who have joined for this special lecture session. And not but least, but Professor Sumana Bandyopadhyay for delivering a wonderful lecture on very important issues. And hope in future we will also hear from her on different aspects and different topics, as we are going to start some academic activities through our new urban arena of SAIARD. And in future we will also expect to generate some more and more urban planners, urban economics, and urban policy makers, particularly in sector of urban sectors. So hopefully, definitely we will do together. And thanks, ma'am, once again, and thanks to all the participants for being here. Thank you.